because they may have different expectations for how that form is filled out. The form was designed one way, but over time people may have evolved other ways of articulating what should be in sections. So you should communicate with the advisors to make sure that you are clear on what they want from that form. And the templates that are used, some are industry-based and some are research-based. Like I said, my team has a research-based template. All right, so fundamentally, the keys to documentation, you want to think about what decision was made and record that, and then the context for the decision. So the wraparound information that makes that decision make sense. And so oftentimes you're going to want to include the standards, the lit review, the drawings, the sketches that would make that decision make sense. And it has to be measurable and observable because it's an engineering team, right? If you just decide, we're going to use Java because 3 people on the team know Java. Well, next semester, the students on that team may not know Java anymore. And so now they want to switch to C++ because they know C++. That happens a lot, actually. There needs to be a more set reason for why you made a design decision than we felt like it. It needs to be measurable and observable. And when possible, use a visual display of information because the human brain can take in much more detail using a visual display of information than a written display of information. Right. Okay, as for your role, you want to think about how you can facilitate your teammates doing a task that many of them, frankly, resent doing. Like, they feel like it's the least important part of the EPICS class, when in reality, as practicing engineers, practicing engineers in industry spend at least 40% of their time doing documentation. Right? This is a fundamental part of being a practicing engineer. And if you don't like doing documentation, you're probably not going to be a successful engineer. Right? That's just the sad part of being an engineer. So you want to focus on helping your teammates to understand the importance of the documentation. So if you can articulate why documentation is important in a way that they can understand, whether it's from the project partner's viewpoint or from their own viewpoint next semester when they can't remember why they did something this semester, or it is from the viewpoint of the advisor who's going to grade them. Like, whatever the value proposition is for your team, if you can articulate it from their perspective, do it that way. Momentum matters. So if you can get them started doing documentation and keep them going on it, after a while it just becomes habit. And the momentum will keep them doing the documentation because it's just like any other habit, right? If you do it 30 times in a row, it will become a self-sustaining habit. So you've got to get them to do the documentation 30 times before it becomes a habit. And authority and influence don't derive from the fact that you are the project archivist, but from your action and impact. So if you make it easier for them to find their documentation and use their documentation, then you are a good project archivist. And it's not because you have the title of project archivist. And authority and influence is there for the taking if you can solve your teammates' problems. So the thing about documentation, people think it's annoying. But the thing is, if you do it well, it saves you so much time. My background is I'm in library and information science, and my research area is research data management. In the cases where documentation and information is handled well, it means that everyone has access to it and everyone can make new meaning out of it and do new designs, make new knowledge out of it. When it's not done well, it's lost to everybody. And that, unfortunately, is what happens with EPICS a lot. It's not just that it's not done well and then people spend a lot of time to find it. It's done so poorly that whole projects are scrapped, right? So we're trying to move towards the practice of doing it so well that it provides platforms for new innovation. All right, so now we're going to do an FAQ, but I'm going to ask the question and you're going to give me answers. So what are some signs of good project documentation that you have seen? Yeah. Lots of pictures and lots of comments describing the pictures. Yes. Yeah.
When they're trying to explain what they did last semester, they don't have to dig through and look. They know where everything is. So they can almost scroll through the documents as they're explaining versus looking and then explaining.
Okay. So when people who are on the team from previous semesters know the documentation so well that they can articulate what they did last semester as they scroll through the documentation without having to search for everything. Okay. Yeah.
A clear list of the goals and also the requirements to meet those goals.
A clear list of the goals as well as the requirements to meet the goals. Yeah. Isn't it lovely when it's just there?
But I have yet to see it in an EPICS document.
It has yet to appear in an EPICS document. I know, right? So that is a beautiful goal. Maybe your team will be the first.
I'm trying.
Yeah, I know.
I'm yelling at them about it.
Yeah. Any others? Okay. So what are some signs of weak documentation that you have seen in EPICS? The failure to have the list of goals and what is required to meet it? Yeah. Any other signs of weak documentation? Yeah.
Large sections that are incomplete.
Large sections that are just incomplete, just not there. Yeah. I had one team that just didn't turn in the design document last semester. Just an entire semester's document, just not there. Yeah.
Assumption that the reader understands what's going on.
Yes, assumption that the reader understands what is going on. This is particularly true around acronyms. Failure to explain units of measure, failure to explain shorthand within the team. So for instance, if they're using the design lab over on 3rd Street, using the acronym of the building and shorthand for the tools they used without explaining what those tools are and where they're located. Yeah, things like that.
When everything's 36 different fonts and colors and it looks like everyone went in and added like their own font in that instant versus like meeting as a team and actually writing something.
Yeah, so when everything is 36 different colors and fonts so that it looks like there are 36 different authors instead of one cohesive document created by a team. Yeah, that's true. All right. What suggestions would you make to a team who submitted poor documentation? Yeah.
I'd update as the weeks progress, not like keep it on week 13.
Right. So this one, she said update as the weeks progress, not on week 13, which is true, but you have to catch them early in the semester. You can't give them that feedback on week 13, right? So yes, that's true. What else? Yeah. Proofread.
No one does it.
It's true. Very few students like to proofread. It is very important, though. Yeah, I know. What else? What about structuring the document in a poorly laid out document? What tips can you give them for structuring a document? Follow the document that's there. That's a good one. Any others? Fill it out completely. Include images. Work together as a team to complete it. Yeah.
And maybe agree on the structure before you do it so you can avoid it. So even if there are 36 different authors, it doesn't look like it.
agree on a structure from the beginning so that you can work asynchronously and still have a cohesive work. Yeah. Any others? Okay, I still have questions. All right, when does your team report out, and when do you report out as a project archivist? So how do you know if your team is creating their documentation? When do they report out on their documentation? And when do you report back to them as a project archivist? Okay, I stumped you. All right, so there's a couple of different ways you can do this. The first can be you can tag it onto PICS. So one of their goals can be a documentation goal. You can set it up with your project lead or team lead to include that. And that's probably the lowest overhead way to do it because they're already doing PICS anyway. So you can just tuck it in. For our documentation goal this week, we filled out section so-and-so on the design doc, or we created a design matrix, or, right. When you report out as the project archivist, you can figure that out in consultation with your advisor and your team lead. And there are different ways. It sort of depends on your team culture. But again, if you're going for momentum, I think that the teams where the project archivist reports out on a weekly basis are particularly effective. And the reason that they're particularly effective is because it's always on everybody's mind then. So one thing that you can do is if at the end of PICS, you can say, the state of the documentation is, a la the State of the Union. As of right now, we have one paragraph of documentation for 3 weeks. We should probably have more than that. Or we have no documentation and it's week 4. We should have more than that. Or we're doing really well. This sub-team has been working hard and updating theirs. This sub-team, you probably should be working on it, right? Or you can designate certain weeks as documentation weeks. So if you know week 4, week 8, week 12, and week 15 are going to be important, you can designate those weeks ahead of time. So 3, 11, and 12 are going to be the weeks that you are going to point to as your weeks where you are going to be working with people on documentation. And then how frequently do you think everyone should be writing up their documentation? Every week? Okay. Some teams, they say no. Some teams are like, I don't care. Every other week, whatever. But for your team, you'll have to make that decision and then communicate it with the members of your team. Because the one thing that you cannot do is assume the documentation is going to get done, because the documentation will never get done if you assume it's going to get done, right? So it has to be an articulated goal of the team, right? Your turn. You get to ask me questions now. Yes?
It's not a very good question, but can you put the website up again?
Mm-hmm. It's homepage. It's guides. Oh, it looks messy. It's guides.lib.purdue.edu/EPICSPA. Any other questions? Okay, well, I think there's probably something in here after us since we've been having people walk in. All right, so if you have questions at any time, my contact information is on this website. I'm also the advisor of the EII team, so you can find me on Thursday mornings over here. with lab time then. And I am the advisor of the project archivist. So if you are having difficulty with a documentation related something, I am happy to help you in any way I can. All right, have a great evening.